Hello and welcome to India's World. Japan's Prime Minister Shinzo Abe wants his country's armed forces to fight abroad for the first time since Second World War. His cabinet has approved 2 sets of legislations to this effect, and now the bills are pending in the Japanese parliament. The new laws will remove geographical restrictions on the operations of Japan's self-defense forces and allow them to come to the aid of allies internationally. The controversial bills have divided the Japanese public, with many protesting against what they call war legislation. The new move seeks to convert a resolution that was adopted by Shinzo Abe's cabinet in July last year into laws. To discuss the implication of the new Japanese bid to expand the country's military role, we have with us a very distinguished panel of experts. We have with us Ambassador Arjun Asrani, a well-known Japan expert. He was India's ambassador to Japan, having served in 3 postings in that country. He was also India's ambassador to Thailand and Libya and Consul General of India in New York. We have with us Ambassador T.C. Rangachari. He was India's ambassador to Algeria, France and Germany. He was in charge of the East Asia desk in the Ministry of External Affairs for a record number of 8 years. And we have with us Dr. Srabani Roychoudhury. She is Associate Professor of Japanese Studies at the Center for East Asian Studies at Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. I welcome all of you to this discussion. Ambassador Asrani, let me begin with you. Tell us something about Article 9 of the Japanese Constitution and pacifism, and do you see the new laws on military expansions following the resolution of the cabinet last July that Japan must expand its role and must drop the self-imposed ban on providing military assistance to friendly countries under attack?
Actually, Article 9 of the Constitution was imposed on Japan by the American occupying forces at that time. But Japanese have got so used to it, and by and large, the Japanese suffered so much during the war that they are amongst the most anti-militarist people in the world. So there is genuine peace-loving opposition, but that is one part of the opposition to Mr. Abe's moves. There is another much more intelligent, I would say, scholarly opposition, and that is this will get us involved in America's wars. Why should we get involved? This article has protected us, let us keep it that way. But the history is that whenever the Americans have found it useful, they have managed to persuade the Japanese to tweak the interpretation of Article 9. So once again, Mr. Abe is only reinterpreting the Article 9, he is not able to change the constitution.
Okay. Ranga, how will these new sets of laws enable Japan to defend itself more effectively? That's what Abe's ministers are saying.
Well, you know, a very useful comparison, particularly now in this year, which is commemorating the 70th anniversary of the end of the war, is to compare Japan with Germany. Back in 1995, after the end of the Cold War, Chancellor Kohl used to say that Germany has now become a normal nation. And Japan has been striving to be a quote-unquote normal nation, because a normal nation has a military which is used for such purposes as the government may think fit, of course, to defend the territoriality, integrity and sovereignty of the country, but beyond that, if necessary, to participate in peace efforts elsewhere. Now, therefore, when we are now in this context talking in terms of the new legislation and so on, it has to be seen in terms of the relaxation of the very strict regime that was imposed on the armed forces. As it is in the case of Iraq as well as in Afghanistan, Japan did send medical teams to participate in the wars there, which were, in fact, in the case of Iran, not even sanctioned by the UN. So maybe in some ways they should be seen as bringing the laws and the theory in sync with the reality on the ground that's happening.
But shouldn't normal be defined by Japanese citizens? Why should international normal of saying that every country's army should be able to go to war wherever it wants, subject to government's sanction, of course? Why should that normal be imposed on the Japanese people? Let them decide.
This government is an elected government. It's the Japanese people who have decided that this will form the government. So if the government decides and the people approve, it is the Japanese who are approving, or for that matter, disapproving.
Well, the parliament hasn't approved it as yet, though.
Not yet, quite right.
Okay, Srabani, these are 2 sets of legislations. First one is, of course, just redefining the role of the self-defense forces, etc. The second one is more important because this is a brand new blanket legislation which paves the way for Japan to provide logistics support to other countries engaged in military operations elsewhere, even when Japan is not directly under attack. Now, Japan already could assist US forces, give them logistics support if they were operating in the vicinity of Japan. They also have a law which permits them to go on UN peacekeeping missions, 1992 law. So why the need now to say we will participate in these wars directly elsewhere?
I personally think this all goes back to the Abe's election win that he, tutored his manifesto to direct people to say what Sir just now said about being a normal state. Along with it, I think this logistics suppose going beyond the territorial waters is also to do with the maritime security issue that Japan has been constantly trying to pose itself and to the world show that it is in alliance with US. But what fear that the scholars as well as I think most of the conservative people in Japan has is whether the new reinterpretation of the article along with what the new move that the US-Japan agreement that has been signed currently at 2015 April, whether it is these two which is going to direct Japan to move and become a partner to US warfare, and that is the question. That
we're going to discuss that in a bit. Ambassador Asrani, how sound is Abe's argument that Japan needs to take these steps because it is no longer possible for individual nations these days to defend themselves, and that the security environment in Asia has changed and therefore Japan needs to do all this?
Yeah, I think Mr. Abe is very correct because number one, so far Japan has depended entirely on the United States, which was all right as long as US could afford it economically. Even today, when American forces to about 50,000 exist in Japan, they are at some cost to Japan. I think some billions of dollars are paid to USA. But still, USA cannot guarantee the arrangements required in the Indo-Pacific area vis-a-vis Chinese assertiveness. So the countries of the region have to do something for themselves. This has been American pressure, I think, on Japan.
Yep.
And the Japanese agree going along with this.
All right.
So both USA and China are responsible, and let us not forget that that is what got Abe elected with a good majority.
All right. So we're going to discuss this further, but we need to take a break at this point. We'll continue with this interesting discussion in a bit. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing Japan trying to expand its military role and bringing in legislation which would enable it to do so. Professor Roychoudhury, do you think that these laws are part of the same process which led Abe to ease the ban on arms exports and increasing defense spending, which was actually declining earlier?
Yes, I personally think you have to understand that, Japan's essential diplomatic moves are also to do with economics. Japan's economy now needs newer industries, somewhere where they can start rebuilding its economy, and the defense was one such sector, and therefore the whole principle of wanting to spend, allow for arms to be sold as well as defense spending going up. We must also understand that in this whole process, Abe is also trying to promote what is called positive pacifism, where he wants Japan to have some kind of an international role beyond just playing its role on the economic front. And I think both of them are the reasons that it's going. After all, you must realize that even this time the MAST 2015, which is being held in Yokohama, is having an exhibition of Japanese war and weapons and products, which essentially means that Japan wants to be a seller of these things. So that's a huge new dimension to the entire.
Ranga, to what extent are these developments taking place as a response to increased regional tensions, particularly in the South China Sea? So is the aggressiveness of China as an economic and military power prompting Japan to change its military posture?
But before we get to that question, this whole concept of normalcy that I mentioned, look at it from another point of view. Japan has ambitions of being a permanent member of the Security Council. Then it should be ready to shoulder burdens and responsibilities that go with being a permanent member. And a very important part of that responsibility and burden is peacekeeping. because it's only the Security Council which can impose any kind of punitive measures, and then the UN goes along. If those punitive measures...
Peacekeeping was allowed under the 1992
Not just peacekeeping.
law.
It's not just peacekeeping. Sometimes peacekeeping has to be preceded by having to use force in order to impose a certain situation.
All right.
So from that point of view, if Japan has those kinds of ambitions, then clearly Japan will have to be prepared to be able to do that. I think it's because of Japan and because of the very high decibel campaign that has been conducted in the course of the last 70 years or so by those who have been victims of Japanese militarism in the past, that has made it very difficult for us to think of Japan as any but in the context, the historical context of its militarism.
Okay.
Think of it as any other country, we wouldn't even be debating this issue.
All right. Ambassador Asrani, the China question, would you agree that Japan's industrialization from 1858 and then the Meiji Restoration, its ascent, which began in mid-19th century, took place against the backdrop of a weak, fragmented and introverted China. And today it is faced by a China that is economically aggressive, that is militarily aggressive, and that is what is leading to, Japan responding in this new fashion to a qualitatively new environment that it finds surrounded itself by.
Oh yes, I think the Chinese assertiveness has been the biggest factor in getting Mr. Abe elected. He has been very helpful to Mr. Abe. But I wanted to point out one thing. We discussed just now the recent fair in Yokohama of defense equipment available from Japan. We must distinguish between Article 9 of the Constitution and the question of export of defense equipment. Export of defense equipment is not controlled by Article 9 of the Constitution. It was purely a cabinet decision taken about 50 odd years ago, which has now been revised by Mr. Abe in the changed economic circumstances. And for us, that is very important, because instead of depending only on Russia for submarines and aircraft carriers, at least we can have a second source and very efficient sort of naval equipment, which is, I think, the chief subject of the Japanese exhibition in this.
Okay, Ranga, I mean, I don't know why we are skirting the China question. If do you think it's the assertiveness of China plus a change in US strategy? Because US no longer has a grand strategy of trying to control balance of power in every region and is relying more and more on regional allies to play an effective role to further its interests and maintain that balance of power. So are these the two factors that are also impinging on the
I don't think
decision?
you're skirting the China issue at all, because Ambassador Asrani pointed out that it is the Chinese and the US.
Well, he said triptychically they helped Abe without explaining how Abe was a Chinese candidate. I don't understood that.
I don't think the implication was that he was a Chinese candidate.
No, I know that.
But the fact is that it's not just China. Right? It's not just Japan. I think all of China's neighbors today, I think also in the context of regional peace, there are concerns. And I think this is something which the Chinese also seem to realize, because since the beginning of this year, there has been an effort to tone down the rhetoric. And there has also been an emphasis on the part of China to talk in terms of peaceful resolution, dialogue, negotiations, etc. But the fact is that irrespective of what the rhetoric is, China is today the second largest economic power. And it is in the logic of history that any economic power also becomes a strong military power. Today, China's defense budget is bigger than that of Japan and India put together. So therefore, if countries in the region, Asian region, East Asian region, and then those who have active live disputes with China of one kind or another are concerned that they are unprepared or ill-prepared or not in a position to defend their interests, it is logical that they would then seek to adopt those measures which would try to remedy or rectify that situation.
Okay, so earlier also you had said that the military expansion or exports of military weapons is also linked with what's happening in the economy. Now, Japanese economy suffers from an aging population, falling consumption levels, a GDP that's virtually flat and not growing at the expected rate. So today, in today's world, as Ranga said, you want to be a big military power, you also have to be a big economic power. Now, do you think Abenomics is working towards that, and do you think Japan will become that economic power to fulfill the military ambitions that Mr. Abe has?
It's a very tough question to answer. I think many people are working on this whole thing. But as I look at it, I don't think so. Because Abe's economic policies that he's come up with, the first two arrows that he shot were fine. But the third arrow, which requires structural changes, are definitely not happening. And I don't see much happening in an economy where the structural changes don't happen. And more importantly, even the big business houses are skirting the whole issue of foreign investments, etc., happening in Japan through various means in their, selling of stocks and etc., etc. So I don't see that.
Quickly. Yeah, very quickly. What I wanted to show is, in fact, by taking up these bills, you might in fact be constraining the political space available in order to get those economic reforms through, because you are generating a certain degree of opposition, and that might get reflected in other.
I'm going to come back to you, sir, immediately after this, but we need to take a break at this point. We'll be back again with this discussion in a bit. Don't go away. Stay with us. Welcome back. We're discussing Japan's proposed military expansion. Mr. Asrani, you wanted to say something before we went on the break.
You correctly pointed out that Japan is no longer the great economic power as it used to be as compared to China today. Certainly, it will remain for a long time to come a major economic power, but it is precisely because it is no longer as big as China in its economic or military power that it is seeking friendship and almost alliances with countries like India and Australia, in addition to the existing alliance with USA. And I think he is successful. And US pressure is, of course, on both Australia and India to join with Japan.
The so-called quadrilateral. Ranga, all of us have sat here and discussed this, and there seem to be rational reasons for what Mr. Abe is doing. Then why is it that the new legislative package doesn't have the support of the majority of the Japanese people? There's an NHK survey which shows that 49% of the Japanese don't understand what the new laws are, or only partially understand them, and 50%, presumably those who understand it, they're opposed to it.
Well, this is, I suppose, a political task that the government in Japan, Mr. Abe, will have to undertake, of persuading public opinion and persuading the parliamentarians that to see and accept the logic that has impelled the cabinet to go through with this legislation. I think again, I go back to the point that I made earlier, that because of the history of militarism, history of the war, and the, even if I might use quote unquote the word indoctrination that has taken place along those lines in the last 70 years.
Indoctrination for pacifism as opposed to indoctrination for war, which is also a possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Putting them to sleep.
Absolutely. People have come to look upon Japan in a certain way. Now, naturally, when you're trying to change what has been in public mind over 7 decades, it's going to meet with certainly lack of, acceptability, possibly also lack of knowledge, information, and so on. And let's not forget, Japanese militarism was extremely destructive, extremely aggressive, and I think it caused real havoc in this part of the world, including something that we expressed our soldiers experienced as fighting for, in the British Indian Army.
Absolutely, point well taken. But Srabani, now if you read this legislation, it says that each time the Japanese forces have to go abroad, they have to go to Parliament for permission. It's not a blanket permission that the executive decides and you go. They're even saying not a single officer would leave the shores of Japan till Parliament has approved this operation abroad. In that case, why the opposition? If I can understand it sitting here, why don't the Japanese people? Is there something else?
See, it is a fear that this is a baby step that is being taken in a direction which will finally lead to a more aggressive move by the government. And if we do not at this point of time make enough noises or make difficult, it might snowball into something much more executive oriented rather than legislative oriented.
Or that Japan might be fighting other people's wars, as Ambassador Asrani pointed out right at the beginning.
Yes. The fear basically because they see what has been happening to the US citizens. You're being pushed into Iraq wars and Afghanistan without much of choice from the people's point of view. I think that sort of implicates why they are taking such strong steps.
One very quick word. The fact is that Japanese people also, and this is not as an apology of militarism, but Japanese people also suffered the consequences of militarism. Japan is the only country where nuclear weapons were dropped.
That's it.
And therefore, for the people to fear something, if not the same thing, but something similar happening, and again bringing Japan to misery, is surely a factor that cannot be completely kept out of reckoning.
Nuclear attack on Japan, now it turns out, historians are saying, was the result of US militarism. There was the interview of Dwight Eisenhower has been published where it says that Japanese were in any case going to surrender. Where was the need to bomb them?
US experimentation.
Yeah, whatever it was.
Well, you could very quickly again, you could say the same thing in response in regard to the bombing of Dresden on 14th February 1945. Hitler died on the 30th of April. So this is just 2 months before that.
All right. So no, we don't want to digress and go there. But Ambassador Asrani, do you think Prime Minister Abe, through various measures that he's taking, is making a fundamental ideological and practical break with the social, political, economic and foreign policy order that has defined Japan since the Second World War? That it's a paradigmatic shift that is taking place.
He has been, I give him high marks for the courage. As you said, there is a lot of opposition from both the peaceniks as well as people who don't want to join the US or other world powers at Japan's expense. So he has a lot of opposition. But I think he is a nationalist who thinks for his country, and he has had the courage to lead the country in the direction. And the least I expect is what has happened, and that is export at least of weapons, so that the Japanese economy can be revived. But in terms of keeping peace in Asia Pacific, he will have to depend upon countries like Australia, India, and substantially USA.
Ranga, and I'll ask these questions to all of you. How do these changes in Japan's military posture impact India? And what should we be anticipating and what should we be doing? Should we be joining Japan and Australia and America to become a sort of a bloc in this region to balance China, as it were? Should we just be taking advantage of the arms exports from Japan, importing submarines and ships from them as we are proposing to do? What should we be doing?
But, let me go back to 1998. Soon after our nuclear tests, I was a member of several delegations that visited Japan, and we found total lack of comprehension, complete lack of understanding of the reasons that led us to conduct our nuclear tests. In fact, when we cited missile threats to India, they talked in terms of the North Korean missiles, which up till that point had always failed. They didn't even reach Japan, they fell somewhere far short. So now, if there is a change where they are looking upon India as a possible partner in peacekeeping, not only is it a huge change, but I would regard it as a very positive change, partly in recognition that India can be that kind of a player in this region, India's capabilities and intentions, and partly that it opens up avenues where there can be collective efforts at peacekeeping.
Okay, we're running out of time. Quickly, Srabani.
Yeah, I personally think this is extremely important for India right now to position itself and move more positively rather than, working at the, policy levels. Now, I think the ground level thing of exchange of military, having, conducting various other kind of platforms to be created. I think those are very important measures.
Asrani, she says that we should be doing military exercises. We've just kept them out of Malabar exercises. So why is that? On the one hand, experts are saying we should involve Japan. On the other hand, the government says, please don't come and do naval exercises with us.
Well, sometimes politics, which is temporary, goes against strategy, which is
you're referring to the Prime Minister's China visit.
So there can be immediate reasons. I am not with the government, so I can't speak with authority. But there could be some immediate reasons. Long term, I think it is envisaged in our conversations with the Americans, with the Japanese. We have agreed that the Japanese can also join in. In principle, we have agreed. So I think it will come.
So it's good for us that Japan's posture is changing?
It is good for us, and I think it is good for China in the long term to know that its assertiveness does create opposition.
Okay. On that happy note, we've come to the end of this discussion. I'd like to thank all of you, Professor Srabani Roychoudhury, Ambassador T.C. Rangachari, Ambassador Arjun Asrani. Thank you very much for participating in this discussion. That is all we have for you today. We'll be back again next week as usual. Till then, goodbye, and thanks for watching India's World.